finally coming to your senses and agreeing with the right side of this debate. But, you know, you said something the other night about this. You know, yes, it's a process crime is a crime. That's why I said process crime. I'm not denying that. But, you know, I found it fascinating. You were on the other night and you said something interesting, that this is all bad now because Roger Stone was dealing with unsavory people who were dealing with foreigners. But it's so convenient how the left, Judge, leaves out the fact that this entire case was started precisely because Hillary Clinton's team, on the record, was dealing with foreign spies, dealing with the Russians. It's like they have amnesia in this case, or they're purposely lying to people.
Dan.
H.R. 1. This sprawling power grab clocks in at 570 pages. Seemingly every one of these pages is filled with some effort to rewrite the rules to favor the Democrats and their friends. I think it's more accurately could be described another way. The Democratic Politician Protection Act. What would it do? It would pile new Washington-focused regulations onto virtually every aspect of how politicians are elected and what Americans can say about them. The Democrats want to make the Federal Elections Commission a partisan institution. Since Watergate, the FEC has been a 6-member body. Neither party gets more than 3 seats. Neither party. It would reduce the FEC to a 5-member body. And listen to this, let sitting presidents pick the majority. The FEC should not be a weapon that one political party can wield against its rivals. There'd also be new latitude to decide when a nonprofit's speech has crossed that same fuzzy line and subsequently forced the publication of the group's private supporters. All this appears to be custom built to chill the exercise of the First Amendment and give federal bureaucrats and the waiting left-wing mob a clearer idea of just who to intimidate. Hundreds, literally hundreds of pages are dedicated to telling states how to run their elections, from when and where they must take place, to the procedures they have to follow, to the machines they have to use. Yet the proposal, Mr. President, does practically nothing to combat the real live voter fraud. It does happen. I'd have to say this, our colleagues across the Capitol know what they're after. But I want to make sure the American people understand what this is all about. And I want to assure the American people right from the outset, it may pass the House, but not the Senate.
So these guys are sitting on the bus ready to go. All right, they're all sitting there, they got their luggage and all this kind of stuff. They're on their bus ready to go on their little trip for 7 days overseas. And so they found out that they weren't going to be able to go because Donald Trump denied their ability to even take a military anything. Trump is the bomb. So they're sitting there on this bus and they're waiting, and nobody's telling them they're not going anywhere. Nobody's even informed them of this letter. Is it because they were too scared to say, excuse me, your trip has been canceled? You might want to talk to Nancy Pelosi about that one. I don't know. Maybe the Secret Service and all those guys just thought it was hilarious that they're just sitting there. I'm sure that they've finally gotten the news via Twitter.
Well, Democrats call that extremism. But who are the extremists here? Well, the ones who refuse to defend their country.
Yeah. The
new Speaker of the House has announced that the Democratic Congress will never, under any circumstances, allocate a single tax dollar to build the border wall. Not because it's too expensive, obviously these are the Democrats, but because a wall would violate some previously unknown and never explained moral code. Watch.
The fact is, a wall is an immorality. It's not who we are as a nation.
How does she fucking know who we are as a nation? She hasn't been amongst the people with her fucking sharp elbows and her bony ass sucking Mueller's dick for 10 years. Done anything besides sit on her fucking bony ass in Congress and act like she's fucking Queen Cunt.
Voting, I wanted to tell the story of Anthony Grant. He's from the town of Eatonville, Florida, wanted to be mayor, ran, lost the vote on election day, but lo and behold, Mr. Grant got more than twice as many votes in the vote by mail system. We later found out that Mr. Grant had intimidated people who did not even live in the town of Eatonville to mail in ballots. And so my question is, I guess to Ms. Gupta, you say that your organization believes that we ought to restore automatically the voting rights of people who've engaged in felonious conduct. Mr. Grant was convicted of a felony. When he's done with his probation and community service and time, should we allow him to vote again?
The Leadership Conference would say yes. After people have completed their sentence and served their debt to society, the right to vote should be restored. I think it's
well, I'm going to reclaim my time. I'm a country lawyer from North Florida, but it doesn't make much sense to me that the way to make our voting system more secure and more trusted is to empower the people who have degraded that system to come back and participate in it. Another circumstance, James Webb Baker. Mr. Baker was from Seattle, but he wanted to influence elections in my state of Florida, and so he would send mailers intimidating people who participated in Republican efforts, really trying to threaten them if they would go vote. We caught up with Mr. Baker. He was ultimately convicted. So you think Mr. Baker ought to be able to vote even though he intimidated my voters in Florida?
I don't know the specific circumstances of that matter, but I think it's very important to recognize that felony disenfranchisement laws are a product of Jim Crow. They were born in explicit racism, with legislatures standing up in the 19th century, constitutional conventions deliberately bragging about their ability to use
right, but I'm not asking about those people, ma'am. I'm not asking about them. I'm talking about the people who go out of their way to intimidate voters. And what you're saying is that then we ought to let those people back into the system. And I noted in your written testimony, you said that the reason that we have to automatically restore voting rights to felons is because of our racially violent past.
Chairman, and my question is for Mr. Von Spakovsky. Representative Collins suggested several alternative names to this act, and I would say this bill should be calling Fleecing the People Act. It contains a provision where federal tax dollars from hardworking middle-class families and single mothers would be lining the pockets of politicians to pay for nasty TV ads and robocalls and paying for politicians' personal child care and health care. Under this bill, it's estimated that at least $3.9 billion of taxpayer dollars would line the pockets of House congressional candidates based on estimates from Bloomberg, and an estimated $6.25 billion would line the pockets of presidential candidates based on the formula in this bill and the 2016 election, for a total of $10.1 billion of taxpayer dollars. To me, this is an outrageous use of taxpayer dollars. You know, Democrats recently, we were in a battle, they blocked funding for a border fence. In Arizona, border security is very important. Now, under this bill, they want to use taxpayer dollars to line the pockets of politicians. To me, it appears they would rather secure their own election than secure our borders in our nation. My question to you is, do you believe this is a good use of taxpayer dollars, sir?
I don't, and I would also say it's unconstitutional. The reason being that, as you know, Americans have associational rights that have been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, very important associational rights, and upheld by very important Supreme Court decisions. And forcing taxpayers to provide taxpayer money for candidates running for office, particularly candidates who they don't support, whose ideas they don't like, I think violates basic associational rights.
The Help America Vote Act failed to comply with it. What was that non-compliance? The Help America Vote Act required reasonable list maintenance. Now, some people prefer to call it purging because it scares people, but it's reasonable list maintenance on duplicates, deads, people who are on the rolls who have moved away. And California was supposed to implement a statewide database. So you could compare Los Angeles County with San Diego County, and so forth, to see who's registered in multiple places. Well, California didn't do that for 20 years. And what it created is a system that the evidence has shown has voter rolls with huge numbers of inactive people who no longer live where they're registered to vote. And that's exactly the kind of thing that H.R. 1 would promote, because it gets rid of reasonableness maintenance opportunities for state election officials.
Mr. Chairman, in 1960, presidential candidate John F. Kennedy needed to win the state of Illinois to win the election. His brother Robert Kennedy called Mayor Richard Daley asking about the vote count in the critically important city of Chicago. When Robert Kennedy asked, "How many votes will we get from Chicago?" Mayor Daley responded, "How many votes do you need?" The Democrat Party has a long history of stealing elections in this country. Our chairman knows very well the history of New York City Democrat politics, with the Democrat bosses in Tammany Hall stealing elections for decades. Whether it's Huey Long in Louisiana or the Black Panthers in Philadelphia, the Democrat Party relies on corruption and voter intimidation to win elections.
Yep.
In 2016, we even witnessed the Democrat Party stealing an election from one of its own candidates, as Hillary Clinton's allies rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders.
Yep.
Now, Mr. Chairman, we are presented with H.R. 1, the Democrat Party's wish list written by special interest groups.
Yep.
And here we go again. This bill works like the Chicago-style Democrat machine. It does nothing to clean up voter rolls that haven't been reviewed in years, allowing dead people and those who have moved away to continue voting. A friend told me a story about his uncle, who was a lifelong resident of Chicago and a lifelong Republican voter. His family learned that after he died, he cast his first vote for a Democrat.
Yeah.
This bill fails to remove and even prevents removal of fraudulently registered individuals. It even mandates the counting of provisional ballots, whether those ballots are cast by citizens or not. Look at Texas, where officials found 95,000 non-citizens have been registered to vote and 58,000 non-citizens voted in Texas elections. It doesn't take a genius to see that this can happen anywhere without proper oversight.
That's right.
This bill also infringes on the state's right to determine whether felons may vote, criminalizes free speech, and weaponizes the Federal Election Commission.